Morning all, here we are, back up in the attic. I don't know if it's cold or hot up here today. I was freezing when I first came up here, but got all the windows shut so that no noise comes in, and it's starting to warm up a bit rapidly. And you might notice the addition of one of my collection of tipfers. That's because I'm getting closer and closer to the inevitable COVID cut. Hair all over the place at the moment. That's definitely coming, unfortunately, but there you go. Right, before we start today, couple of things. Messages. I'm getting so many messages, it's untrue, which is brilliant, and every single one gets read. I must state that, and they do. In fact, at 11:30 last night, I was still sat at the kitchen table with the rest of the family. We've got a little computer MacBook thing on the kitchen table, and we'd accessed the YouTube, and we were still going through messages then with the family, reading them and that. In fact, one of the kids, while we were there, showed me how to put a link. I'll point down because it will be if you scroll down at the end to my website. So if you're interested in a book or whatever, at the end you just scroll down a little bit, and somewhere down there will be a little link. You just click it and it takes you straight there. It's kids for you, eh? Very technical. Yes, messages. Loads and loads of messages, and they're quite long. A lot of the messages, I'm getting quite a lot of long emails, which is brilliant. Like I say, I love reading them. I try my hardest to reply. It may just be a cheers mate and a thumbs up. It may just be a tick like, or it may be an actual reply of a few lines. Don't feel aggrieved if the length of the reply doesn't really correspond to the length of the mail. I have read everything that's been written to me, but basically, if I engaged in a two-way ongoing conversation with every message that does really deserve it, there wouldn't be any filming. I'd just be down there doing that all the time. So, don't be upset if you do message me and it's quite a nice longer message, and you only get, oh, thanks very much, I'm glad you're enjoying them, or something similar, because that's really what I've got time to do, because I want to be up here. This has turned into a behemoth of a thing. I done it just for something to do, built all this and just thought it'd keep me busy. I'm now doing probably somewhere in the region of 8 hours a day. The first day is spent planning, scanning photos, editing old video. I have to reread the book myself, chapter by chapter, to remind myself. I then make loads of notes, which are just nicely hidden down here, pages and pages of them out off camera. Have phone calls with people that I was on the lakes with at that time to remember the stories that aren't in the book. Scan all the photos and then adjust them all in Photoshop, because some of them are quite terrible quality, as is some of the old video. That's day one, and then day two I'm up here, I film, and then I take it downstairs, edit it, stick it all together, render it into one video blog, upload that to YouTube, answer a few more messages, and then the next day comes along, and and I'm enjoying it. I really am enjoying it. It is a full-time job. I don't think I worked this much when I was getting paid, to be honest, but there you go. It's keeping me sane. Hopefully it's keeping you lot sane. But like I say, with the messages, if you get a short reply, I'm not being rude and I'm not being flippant. It's just time restraints. So there you go. That's my tale of woe. Get your little violins out, and we'll get on with the show. Cheers. So, second year of Horton. Obviously, if there's a sudden burst of light there, that's because my impromptu sunshade, which is one of the wife's best pillowcases, just fell off the window. We'll ignore that, pretend that didn't happen. So Horton, second year. At the end of the first year, when we spent all that time in the lodge together in the winter, we'd formulated this plan to go in on a bait. I might have told you this at the end of the last one, I can't remember. But anyway, a few of us had got together and we decided on this big pre-baiting strategy throughout the coming close season. There was loads of people involved to start with, and it dwindled down before it came to actually time to pay, to 4 of us, which was myself, Keith, CP, and Phil Thompson. Now, I sort of knew a couple of guys at Mainline. I knew Zenon, who was something to do with Mainline, and we'd all sort of decided on roughly what we wanted to use. I'd spoke to Zen and he'd spoke to Steve and Kev, who run Mainline, and we'd come up with a bait. It was basically one of their base mixes, the Essential Fish, I think it might have been called, I can't remember. And we'd asked for a plum flavour. We'd given them a plum flavour and they'd sourced it. You know, they know a lot more about that than we do. They'd sourced this particular flavour. So we ended up with this plum fish mealy sort of bait, fish meal protein mix. And we'd taken, you know, they rolled it for us. That was the main thing. And we got it for quite a good price because we bought it in bulk. And we started this sort of pre-baiting campaign, whereas we'd all have a day. So we'd have a day each. So 4 out of every 7 days, someone was down there baiting up. CP lives the closest. He ended up being there most of the time, and Phil did as well, I think. Whereas me and Keith had to travel, you know, up from Crawley at the time, which is about an hour away. And I think in the end, you know, to start with, we put it in lightly, just a kilo here and a kilo there. And within quite a short space of time, we started seeing the fish, and we'd see the fish actually feeding on it, and then the baiting went up and went up and went up. I think over that close season we put in 120 kilos of bait, which is a lot of bait. You know, back then it was an awful lot of bait. It's still a lot of bait now, but this was over probably the last 2 months of the close season, and we could see them eating it. It wasn't just being scattered willy-nilly. You know, if you've got a group of 4 or 5 fish, remember close season fish are very almost tame, and they'd come into an area and you'd put in 2 kilos, and you'd just watch these great big fish going down and just mullering it, and it was gone. So you'd put in another 2 kilos and they'd eat that. So you just keep going. So we just kept baiting them, and we knew come the beginning of the season that they would be, we hoped, almost addicted to our bait. They'd eaten so much of it. No one else was doing it. And we knew that would be a major edge over the coming season. So another thing that was allowed in this close season was plumbing. Excuse me. We were allowed to go around the lake as well as pre-bait. We were allowed to take a marker rod with us and have a feel about, and it was just as well because the weed was getting really thick really early this year. It looked like it was going to be a bumper crop for Canadian pondweed. One particular day I went up there to do my pre-baiting and my plumbing, a bit later towards the end of the close season. There was no one about, no one at all, just me. I thought that's handy because in the back of the motor I was used to carry a mask, you know, a diving mask, not robbing the bank mask, you know, but a proper snorkeling mask. That's what I'm trying to say. So I've gone and got this mask and snorkel out the motor, and I can see all this weed on the plateau area from the bank. So I've stripped off, put the snorkeling mask on, and gone in for a little swim about. Not sure it was exactly allowed, but I'd done it anyway. And I've gone out. I remember on the way out there, this tench came right underneath me, and everything looks big through the mask, but this tench was enormous. I mean, it had a great big hump on it above the back of its head, and it actually, I recognised it. I mean, there was a lot of big tench in Horton at the time, but this one was called the shoulders tench. I think Keith might have been the first one to catch it. I'm not sure. I know I did go on to catch it, and I think I can't remember. It was 8 or 9 pounds. You know, it was a really big tench, but it was this odd shape, a bit like shoulders the carp. So it got called shoulders the tench. Anyway, that's by the by. So I've swum out and I've got out over onto the plateau. Now the plateau, you could see the weed nearly up to the surface around sort of the sides of the plateau. But when I got out there, I made a bit of a discovery. The top of the plateau, now I'd already plumbed this from the bank in previous weeks and just brought in masses of weed. And it was, you know, you'd sort of think from the bank it was unfishable. But what it was, the weed, although it was long, it was a different weed on the top of the plateau, and it laid flat in like big curls, like a sort of an Axminster carpet, if you like. So it was only about 1 inch thick when it was, you know, laying on flat on the top of this plateau. But you pull it back and you get these long strands of weed. So I thought, oh, I'll clock that, because obviously if you used a long hook link and fished on top of it with a slow sinking bait, you'd actually be presented, whereas most people wouldn't do that because they'd think it was like a really, really weedy feature. So I sort of stored that bit of info away for myself, really. Just in case I got in there early on, and it might come in handy. And as it happens, a few weeks later it did, but that's getting ahead. So first day of the season rolled about, and we had a draw this time rather than we having a walk-off. We actually had a draw for swims. Everyone turned up. We didn't have to turn up the night before stupidly early because we'd all been informed that there'd be a draw. I think it was midday on the first day of the lead into the midnight when the season starts. So midday, we're all there outside the lodge. There's this, like I say, I've shown you before, but there's this raised area, sort of barbecue area or whatever. And we're all out there. It's a nice sunny day. We're all proper G'd up for it. We can't wait to get going. Having a few beers, and I think we did have a barbecue going at the time. All the names went in a hat. I think all the permits went in a hat, and there was a bag, and they were all juggled up. There was a few more people here this year. Anyway, the bailiff, head bailiff at the time, stuck his hand in. First one out of the hat, CP. It was just like, it was all these jeers and rrr and fix and what have you. CP, first out of the hat. Numero uno, he called himself for that whole first session. Numero uno. Chest right out. And he chose to go in the Weedy Bay, funnily enough. But me and Keith were desperate to get in those middle swims where I'd hooked and lost that monster, at the beginning of the previous season, and had a couple of fish, and where we'd had results over the first couple of weeks. Because we knew as soon as everyone started casting in the lake, them fish were just going to go bosh straight out in the middle again. I can't remember what number we came out, but we managed to get roughly the area we wanted. We managed, might have even been the same two swims we had before, but we were there. We were chucked out in the middle. Same deal. I think it was an 8 o'clock cast out, and for the midnight start. Come the morning, nothing had happened. I think CP had lost one within about 15 minutes of casting out, but apart from that, absolutely nothing had gone on. There were fish showing, not many, but it was quite strange. I mean, there was quite a few lines and anglers and casting and that. We'd put all this bait in, and we was expecting to absolutely rape it from the off, but it wasn't happening, and no one else was catching. And I do remember seeing quite a lot of fish in the mouth of the Dog Bay, just out into the open water. They started showing on the second day. There were anglers fishing there, not getting bites, but they were showing in a strange way. They were properly coming out and sort of thrashing and going back in, and coming out and thrashing and going back in. The next week, I figured out what had been happening. They'd actually been spawning, but because there was anglers on the lake, they didn't spawn in their normal way, so they were doing what I call spawn dumping. They were thrashing and just spawning in open water, which is quite unusual, but I have seen it on other lakes over the years. So anyway, not a lot happened at all. There might have been a little common or something caught that first week. And we've rocked up for the second week of the session, still not knowing that the fish have spawned, still just wondering why it's so moody on there. I must just say, at this point of the season, there was one other quite memorable day on Horton, and it was right now. And I found the footage of it the other day when I was chopping up video. Like I say, all this video footage was originally on two VHSs, and we dropped various stuff in there. I got this bit of footage which I'm going to show you in a sec, so I'm not going to ruin it. But it was Jacko. He had the ticket on Horton that year, but it was a bit busy for him right at the beginning like that. So he'd gone back and was fishing Shepperton Marina, which is part of the Thames, where he'd done quite a lot in the past. And he'd had a very significant capture, and he'd come down the lake because I was there, Phil was there, Tet was there, to celebrate. And it all, the aftermath got captured on video, much to my expense. So I've got to show you. Let's go there now, back to the 90s, and see what it was actually like.
Well, it's the second week of the season. Jacko had this 36 pounder from the Thames, came down the lake, and we all went out to celebrate. Unfortunately for me, this was the result.
That might be a load of them.
Well,
what can I say? Oh dear, they were the days. Old fat Sam getting all protective of me. She was very protective of me, she really was. Jack was always a little bit dubious of her, because she could be, she was a bitch, let's put it that way. Anyway, I imagine anything like angling went on that day. So let's skip forward to the next day. We still hadn't caught, and we were still trying to, us as in our little group, trying to come up with our first fish. And I think Phil, well, I do remember, Thompson was the first one of our little pre-baiting group to catch, and he had an 18-pound common from the bottom of the bay. His normal method of fishing right close in. He even had a little swim named after him, Phil's Corner. He used to go in there and just fish one down there and one down there. And anyway, he's had an 18-pound common. And then he moved round to near where I was, over at the back of the Dog Bay. And he had the next fish as well. He had the lady, the original, and it was 31 pounds, I believe, which is low. It's usually 34, that sort of size. And it was obviously spawned out, and that's when we realised that the fish had spawned. But I've got a bit of video which I'll show you in a minute. I'll just tell you the story. Because we'd started with the main line. I think it might have actually been the day that Phil had the lady. Steve and Kev had come up to the lake and to introduce themselves, and we sat and had a chat and what have you. And they brought up some t-shirts, some mainline t-shirts, because part of our cheaper bait deal, and pre-rolled and what have you, was obviously to help advertise mainline, because they were a brand new company. I think they'd been going about a year, and they'd left these various t-shirts for us. Now, at the time, we were used to wearing the shocking coloured clothing. None of us were commercially involved in anything. We'd paid for everything we'd got, or borrowed or stolen or whatever. The commercial thing wasn't a big thing. But we'd said if we catch a fish, we'd wear the t-shirt. And to start with, you get your photo taken in your own clothes, and then you put the t-shirt on for a couple of advertising shots and try and stick your chest out so you can see the logo. We didn't really know what we were doing, to be honest. But Phil was a little bit hesitant. He was a little bit embarrassed about getting involved in this. Like I said before, he was the only one of us that actually had any money, really. So I think he thought he didn't need to do it, but he did need to do it because he was part of this agreement. So anyway, we got him dressed up in the t-shirt, and you'll see in the video with he's got this fish on the bank. He went mental with this fish, the lady. It was thrashing about all over the place. But the reason I say all this is the soundtrack. We put a Floyd soundtrack on there, because like I said before, we've overlaid music to a lot of this video. And when I heard the lyric, "Riding the Gravy Train," I thought that is just perfect. It was just a piss take to Phil, really, that he was now riding the gravy train of the advertising for the bait and that. So we just put it on there. It was a bit of a wind-up, really. But let's take a look at that first. We'll take a look at that now, actually.
Unfortunately, I have had to take off the music track, because apparently you're not allowed to put them on YouTube. So you'll have to listen to me chatting on about it. There we go, that's Phil with the lady and a little bit of a juggling act on the bank. I searched for the bit of video of him with the mainline top on, but for some reason I couldn't find it. He's probably got hold of it and deleted it, I would imagine. But it's absolutely amazing fish, beautiful. Like I said, the original with the lady. And that was 31 pounds, our first one. On the new mainline bait, or second one, he had a little common first, but first one of the proper ones on the mainline bait. Quite a few people ask if I know what's happened to Phil Thompson. Well, he has disappeared off to Thailand a few years ago, not been heard of since, and the last snippet of information I had was that he'd bought himself an elephant, which those that know him wouldn't find at all surprising.
Oh, you're back. Caught me smoking again. Naughty boy, eh? Yeah, that's great, that old footage, and I absolutely love all of that. Seeing Phil catch those two fish, Phil, like I say, he's a bit of a margin angler, loves a bit of stalking and that, but always does well when he gets on fish. He'll have a fish. I became a bit interested in his rigs. I'd seen his rigs, his presentation, and it was very different to what most people were using at that stage, including myself. It was very similar to what I used to use, probably 20 years before that, or 10, whatever, long, way back. Basically, Phil's fishing was very, very smoky, you know, very simple, small running lead. I believe he used to make them himself. They're only about 1.5 ounces. A bead, a swivel, and a long nylon hook link with a massive long hair. He used to use these incredibly long hairs and a little super specialist hook. And the more I thought about how weedy it was, and how I was presenting my bait on your standard 8-inch hook link and heavy lead, I started to think maybe he's got something here, you know, maybe this is worth investigating. So I started mucking about, and when I got home I started mucking about with rigs and having a look, and I ended up fishing something very similar, you know. It wasn't exactly the same as Phil's. I wasn't going to use a 5-inch hair, for example, but I used a fairly long, maybe an inch, half-inch to an inch hair, a size 6 hook. Again, not as long as Phil's hook link, but maybe a foot of nylon, maybe a bit more, 14 inches of nylon. And I'd got hold of these, I don't know if you remember them, they were called tri-lobe leads. So it's like a normal lead, but it had 3 lobes on it, hence the name. One side of the lead was completely flat, and when you flipped them in and watched them, they used to go down like that. So they'd waver their way down because of the flat side, so they wouldn't plummet into the bottom at all. So that it was, although they weighed probably 1.5 ounces, they were in effect sort of slow sinking. They did have a tendency sometimes to flip over and tangle a little bit, but as long as you watched the rig go in the water, trapped it and sort of held it down on a tight line, you were fairly confident that the lead's wavering down through it like that and settling on top of the weed rather than plummeting straight in. And then your long hook link, nylon, folds over nicely, would sort of follow it down, flutter down, and I figured that your bait would be presented on top of most of the weed. So anyway, I came back the next week armed with this new info, most of it stolen from Phil, but adapted a little bit, I like to think, for my own angling. So I got down there the next week, and I remember pulling in the car park and it was scorching hot. There wasn't a lot of anglers on there, and the anglers that were on there were up the far end of the lake, the sort of Church Bay and the Dog Bay, because that's where Phil had his result, and there'd been a couple of other fish caught up there, so that's where the bulk of the anglers were. I don't think there was anybody along the causeway. The causeway is the bit nearest the lodge that has the plateau, the feature I said I'd gone out with my mask and snorkel, and then it has 2 other swims, and then it has a swim that became known as the Salt Circle for reasons that I'll go into later. So that's the causeway, the first bit nearest the lodge. Anyway, I've started walking down the causeway. I think I've got a little bit of stalking gear with me, a bit of floater gear just in case, Fat Sam running along beside me. Now, at the time, Concord was still flying. Now, when Concord took off, because I mean, Horton is basically at the end of the runway, so all the planes, you'll notice in probably all the video clips I have, plane noise. It's non-stop. They're every minute, less than a minute sometimes. You can look up and see them all crisscrossing in the sky. But Concord was a different animal. That used to take off, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was twice a day. To go to New York, and then it would obviously come back the same day. It took about 5 minutes to get to New York or something ridiculous. I don't know, it used to break the speed of sound. But as it took off over Horton, it still had, I think they called them the afterburners, it still had flames coming out the back of the engines. It was that, you know, that close to the end of the runway. And the noise, you have never heard anything like it. You know, we used to, for a laugh, as it hit the top of, over the top of the lake, you could jump out of your bivvy and scream at the top of your voice, and no one could hear you. The guy in the swim next door couldn't hear you over the noise of this plane. You could actually feel it reverberating in your chest. It was mentally loud. And I just got onto the causeway this day, just got down to the plateau swim, and Concord came over, this big roar and jets of flame coming out the back. As it went over the lake, it erupted out there on the surface over the plateau. There was just boils and swirls everywhere. I mean, the fish are obviously used to plains, but nothing can get used to Concord, and they must be able to feel that sonic vibration. And I just thought, hey up, there's a few carp out there. So I dropped my stalking kit down, and there was a massive tree in the plateau, huge, great thing, shinned right up to the top of it, and we're talking high. And when I looked down, you could see the plateau. You could see the 3 weed beds that were growing on the edge of the plateau, and then this forest of green in the middle, which only I knew was actually flat and not upstanding. And over the green, like little football pitch in between the 3 hedges, if you like, of Canadian pondweed, there were carp everywhere. Just these big shapes, all just drifting in and out, going between the hedge and out off the plateau, turning round, coming back up on top of the plateau. So this is the opportunity I've waited for. This is absolutely perfect. Back down the tree, went and got my kit. So it's right next to the car park anyway. Dragged all my kit out. I remember I got out my, I used to drink lager back in those days. God knows, what was I thinking? Kronenberg, I think we used to drink. I grabbed my Kronenbergs and put them in the fridge because the lodge is right there. I think I dropped them in the freezer actually for a bit of a quick chill. I thought that'll be handy when I'm set up. It was obviously, let's say, a hot day. So beers in the fridge, kit in the swim, Fat Sam running about doing whatever she'd done. Put them up. I thought I'm going to get this right, you know. I know I want to be. I've seen it, been out with a mask. I know where I want to be presented, and I know how I want to present with these new slow sinking leads and the long hook links. So I put a marker float out there, then climbed right up the tree and looked and thought, oh yeah, it needs to be, you know, a rod length further in and half a rod length further to the right. So I've gone back down, recast it, gone back up the tree. Done this about 3 or 4 times. I'm knackered by the time I've got it in position, but eventually I've got the marker exactly where I want it. And because I've seen it from above, I know how far past I can go for the back weed, how far left or how far right for the other weed beds. So basically I've got like sort of goalposts, you know, I'm fishing in the goalmouth there. Put my 2 rigs out there, by which time, you know, the fish know I'm there. Obviously I've been thrashing about with a marker float. So I thought I'll just put my bait out. I've got a load of bait with me. I'll just put loads of bait out, get the marker in, rigs in position, and then just sit and wait. They're going to come back. They want to be here. So, sure enough, done all of that, got everything all sorted, wound the marker in, set out my little low chair, gone to the freezer, pulled out my Kronenbergs, sat down. Just as I've sat down and cracked open the first Kronenberg, Sticky Beans come trotting down the causeway to fish. And he'd come up for a chat, anything happening. And I couldn't really say no because the fish had come straight back, and there's backs and there's creases and there's the odd boil out there when another low plane goes over it. There's all sorts. It's heaving with carp. And he's like, look, bloody hell. He said, mind if I just drop in next door? Be surprised if you didn't, mate. You know, crack on. There was a swim not very far away at all called One Up, I think. One Up from the plateau. It weren't much of a swim, to be honest, because the plateau had the feature and One Up didn't. You know, by the time you got to One Up, it had come off the plateau, down the slope into deeper water. So there wasn't really very many marks there, but it's one of them, and if you can't get on the fish, you get as close to the fish as you possibly can. So Sticky's gone in next door. He started to set up. I picked up my beer, picked up another cold one, and just the 2 swims are about 20 yards apart, if that. So I just walked along this piece of grass to him, said, here, mate, held out the beer. As he's taken it, where one of my rods has gone, left-hand rod I think it was, on the edge, left-hand side of the sort of goal mouth, steamed off. So beer's gone everywhere. I got charging back and hit into this fish. I remember it ploughed off and it went right through this hedge of Canadian pondweed and burst out the other side. And I managed to get some sort of strain on it, and as I did so it rose up and up onto the surface, and then we just saw this huge back going off through what was going to be Sticky's swim. Huge great bow wave coming off of it, and it just started going and going and going down the middle. And I pulled, and luckily the line's pinged up out of the weed, so now I'm over the weed in direct contact with this fish, and it had this massive great back. You know, you could see straight away it was one of the good fish. Anyway, started playing it and got some measure of control, and luckily it's kited inwards towards the bank, like past Sticky Swim now. So I've managed to bring it back up the margins, away from all the weed, away from the plateau, away from any danger really. It was in a deeper marginal trough. It was plain sailing. Once you got him inside the weed line there, plain sailing. So I've got him in and he's swirling around. Sticky's gone down the front with the net. Can't really see what's going on now. I'm just on the back. Other people have appeared from nowhere. Somebody's got a video camera. I can't actually remember whether it was Sticky with the net. It was someone. You'll see anyway, because the person with the video camera was videoing what was going on. Someone's got the net. And I'm behind them playing this fish, and more people are coming in. I couldn't even see what I was doing. You know, there's all these people there, and I'm playing the fish basically over the top of them. And I'm just kept pulling until someone roars that it's in the net, and it's in the net, and I sort of pushed my way through and had a look, and it's the Parrot, probably the ugliest fish in the lake, but one of the major players, proper up there, 18 player. The year before, he'd actually reached a weight of 42 pounds, I think it was. He was packing it on this fish, but like I said, they'd already spawned this year. And I think on that occasion he was 36 pounds. But as I've said before, it doesn't really matter, does it? You know, you're fishing for individual targets, and when you catch one, it's a major event. And there, like I said, there was a fair amount of people about by now. Lovely sunny day. I've just caught the Parrot. We've done all the photos. You know, I give it the victory cry and all that. I wound in the other rod and I said to everyone, hang about, I'll be back in a minute. Jumped in the motor. Just round the back by Raysbury, so just up the road, there was a Thrasher off licence, and they always had deals on stuff. And I went in there and had a deal on Cronenberg, so it was like happy days. So I filled many carrier bags with loads of Cronenbergs, came back, plonked them in my swim and said, there we go, beers are on me, crack on. And that's exactly what happened. People stayed and drunk, other people came, brought more beer. Anything that weren't cold enough, we chuck it in the freezer for an hour and then take it back out. And it became a little carp party on this causeway. There were people there, I think, that weren't even fishing, that had just come along because, you know, we were having the crack. I can't remember who was there. There was quite a few of us there. And the day rolled on, and the afternoon turned, I think a barbie came out, and it turned into sort of evening, not dark at all by any stretch of the imagination, but late, let's call it late afternoon. And I got all these drunken reprobates in my swim, and I was one of them as well. Obviously, I was probably the worst because I'd caught the Parrot. And one of my rods has roared off. I was like, oh God, I'm going to get some stick here. So I've hooked into this second fish. Of course, everyone's throwing advice at me. You should do this, and need to do that. Yeah, I'll do this, pull this way, pull harder, give it some line. And there's people up the trees looking in, and again, I couldn't even see what was going on for everyone crowding in the front. Anyway, I planned this fish and it fought like mental. And it's managed to bury itself in the closest side of the right hand of these weed hedges. Proper bury itself. Now, we had the punt there. We could have used the punt, but for some reason decided not to. And I thought, I know, I'll strip off. I'll get in and I'll wade round the big tree onto the pontoon where the punt is and get a different angle, because like I say, the fish was on the right anyway in this weed. So sure enough, I've stripped off, to many jeers and boos and what have you, piss taken out of me budgie smugglers. I've got in the lake and waded. It's a lot deeper than I thought, I can tell you. Once I got it off the margin into that deeper shelf, I was up to my armpits and the next thing. I was half wading, half swimming, and I've managed to bob round the corner and then climb out again on the jetty. And so I can say someone's run round with the net. I think everybody run round. So we're all round here now in front of the lodge on the jetty. And sure enough, from this angle, I've managed to extract this fish from the weed. Play it in, it's gone in the net, and it's a fish we called the long one, 28 pounds. Absolutely beautiful fish. Yeah, proper character. We all knew who it was or what it was. And again, Sticky's still there, the video's still there. And I've got some great footage on the bank with it. And I believe if this is the bit of footage I'm thinking of, we'll see in a minute, I think Fat Sam appears quite a bit in it as well, which is really nice for me to see that again. So we'll take a look at that now. So here we are, back in the day. Oh, it's Fat Sam, look at her, bless her. I knew she was in here somewhere. She was a hell of a dog, that one. Yeah, I think I said that this fish was the long one, but looking at it now, I think it might be a fish we called No Name. I think a lot of these ones didn't have names when we started on there. We sort of named them as we went along. Some of the sort of mid-20s and that. Look at that t-shirt. That's a proper one, isn't it? The old purple Converse joggers. I used to love them trousers. Wonder what happened to them. Wonder if you can still get them. Resurrect it. That'd be a good look in today's world, wouldn't it? And the mats as well, the old unhooking mats then, they were just a bit of foam inside a carp sack. Wouldn't get away with that nowadays, but that's all we had at the time, make your own. Don't think you could actually buy sort of commercial unhooking mats back then. There he is. Lovely job. Right, there we go. Another trip back to the 90s. And needless to say, I woke up the next morning with some degree of a headache, but very, very happy. They were the only two fish I had that session. But the next 2 weeks, I think sort of the next 2 sessions anyway, I did quite well. I added another 4 fish to the tally, and I managed to get back into the plateau one of those 2 trips. And it was almost like a repeat performance of the time before. You know, I knew the layout. Again, fished the goldmouth, got a load of bait out there, and had a couple of fish, I think, that session up to 27. But the 27 was a rare one. It was a fish called blacktail, and up until that time, I think this was his only ever capture on the bottom. I think maybe Del Smith had it off the surface, and someone else might have had it on a float at some stage. But it really didn't seem that keen on eating angler's bait, and I took that as a proper good sign that our bait was working, you know, because it's not a boily fish. We'd hand fed them all through the close season. I was now getting some good results. Phil was also getting a few. He'd had a few more doubles. In fact, he ended up with the nickname of PDT that year, well, from then on really, which was Phil's Doubles Thompson, because he seemed to be, he'd taken over Keith's mantle, if you like, as being the doubles expert, you know, swim full of big fish, Phil would have an 18-pound common or a 19-pound common. But no, I took that as a good sign that they were on the bait was starting to work, or starting to produce. We knew it was working, we'd seen them eating it. And that blacktail, what a fight. Unbelievable. I mean, just a mental fight. It completely beat me up from the bank. It weeded me up in every weed bed going. Again, I was down to the budgie smugglers in the lake. I think it might have been Jacko was with me that particular day, Phil Jackson, Jacko. He'd joined that year. In fact, I was chatting to him the other day about it. He's still very, very good mate of mine, Jacko. And, you know, going back to what I said before, some of the friendships we formed on Horton are still proper close mates. I've had CP on the phone this morning. I've had Jenks on the phone this morning. I had Jacko on the phone yesterday. You know, these are close friends of mine. And this was all formed, apart from Jenks, this was all formed at Horton. Reg, all of these sort of people. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it was Jacko was helping me with the net and what have you. But in the end, I had to strip off. I went in the lake. I tried this angle. I tried the old trick from the jetty. That didn't work. So we had to launch the punt. Now, I've got footage of this whole debacle. Yeah, we're going to see in a minute. But I'd just like to sort of apologise for the filming of the punt. I haven't spoke yet about John Buckley. John Buckley was a mate of Phil's. Great big lad. You'll see him in that Christmas video, the end of season poem video that I spoke about last week at some stage. great big lad. He probably wouldn't mind me saying he's not always the sharpest tool in the box, although he is a nice fella. His videoing was awful. We've edited loads of it out back then when we made the VHSs. I think we had video of his eyeball where it was round the wrong way. We had video of his foot, the sky, you know, and occasionally he gets the boat with me playing this fish. But we went out in the punt and played this fish, and it seemed like forever. You know, full compression on the rod, giving it loads of teddy, and it was just going absolutely ballistic, this fish. But eventually, as you will see in a bit of video, I succeed. So let's go and have a look at that.
It's not quite the same watching this without the music track. I got quite used to the music track over the top of it. But obviously the original audio's been lost somewhere in the mists of time. That's Jacko with the net there. And me with my amazing physique. I don't know where I'm off to there. I do actually. I think I'm wading around trying to get to the boat. I don't know why I didn't bring the boat actually to the swim. Would have made an awful lot more sense. But obviously there's some mad plan in my head at the time. So that's the jetty I was talking about off the end of the lodge where we kept the punt. Various onlookers behind the bushes there. Look at them budgie smugglers, eh? Another product of the 90s that thankfully has gone. Yeah, this is the video, the bouncy John Buckley video. And there he is, on the bank, blacktail, with the old, look at that, puffing the little chest out with the mainline top on there. That was a hell of a carp, that blacktail. Amazing creature. Look at him, angry looking beast. That's John Buckley. He was actually a very good photographer, as I remember, just not so good on the videography. But yeah, very rarely caught, that fish. And apparently still alive today, amazingly.
So there we go, that's blacktail in all his glory, beautiful fish. And it was around this time when I was getting my results up the plateau end that Keith started catching on the bait as well. In fact, I think it was only CP, I think he was the last one to join in, if you like. He hadn't caught at this stage. But Keith had some results. He had, again, one of the sort of lesser 18, one of the ones that everyone wanted, but not the big five, which is a fish known as the Woodcarving, which is absolutely beautiful. And as it happens, it's still alive today. Hardly anything of those original fish is left alive. I think there's 4. And one of those is the Woodcarving, and that got caught because I've been fishing next door to Horton this winter, and it got caught this winter at just over 40 pounds. Unbelievable fish, but back in this day it was probably, I think, 21 up, and it growing, although it was old, up to about 26 on the 3 years I was there. But Keith managed to have that from his favourite, what had become his favourite swim, where he caught shoulders from, was now called the shoulders swim. And whenever Keith could get in there, he would get in there. You know, he was just drawn to it like a magnet. He loved it. And it was a lovely swim. I probably described it before, but it's like a grass path and then a grass slope down to this little tiny, dear little platform at the front, and just a little gap in the sort of marginal reeds or sedges or whatever they were. And it generally had a big weed bed running across in front of it, and he'd fish just behind the weed bed. And like I say, I wasn't there. I think he was there. Well, I know he was because I've seen it on the video. He was there with his missus, and it was the middle of the day, scorching hot day, and he's had a bite, and he's hooked and played and weeded and unweeded, and eventually landed this fish and looked in the net, or got on the mat and looked in the net, and it was the Woodcarving. You know, this absolutely immaculate carp. I'm going to show you the video because the colours of not just the fish, but the colours of Jenkins. You know, I thought I was bad in those days, but the colours of Jenkins are something completely different league altogether. So let's have a little look.
Yeah, I mean, look at those shorts. They are something else, aren't they? I've had to mute the original soundtrack on this because of planes again. But yeah, it's not exactly what you call stalking kit, is it? Unbelievable. But then when he's got the fish on the bank, he puts on a sensible t-shirt. How does that work? Tell you how it works. It was a mainline advertising t-shirt. That's how it works. He must have hated the ones that came in green. Surprised he didn't order himself one in fluorescent pink, tie-dye or something.
Yeah, you'd certainly notice him coming, wouldn't you? Bless him. But I think he actually had 2 fish that session. I think he had a smaller common and that beautiful wood carving. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful fish. The weed, I've mentioned the weed a couple of times, but it was very significant feature on that, our second year on Horton. It had just gone ballistic. As such, I spent a lot of my time, if I couldn't get in somewhere like the Plateau, moving about for a quick bite. Most of my bites that year came within 10 minutes of casting it out. Just literally get in a swim, see a fish, flick it out there, handful of bait or pouch full of bait around it, get a bite and move. And as such, I completely changed my fishing gear. I used to leave the bed and the brolly and that in the motor. It's not a big lake, it's no problem to walk back to the car park. I got rid of my normal rucksack and everything, and I'd got a blue plastic box that said across the side, it embossed in it, stolen from Halfords, which it was. And I think I'd made a wooden lid with a bit of sponge on it, wrapped in a black bin liner and then taped to the top just as a seat. And I had this on a little 2-wheeled trolley, the sort of thing that your granny would go up the shops with. You know, one of them, they have them tartan shopping bags in it with the old Jack Russell sticking its head out the top. One of them. So I've got this little poxy 2-wheeled trolley, this plastic stolen from Halford's box with everything I needed for my day's fishing. I got my bait in there, my tea making kit, you know, my fags, bits of tackle. At the time, my tackle box, I think it was a tobacco tin. No, it was a little ice cream tub, plastic ice cream tub, and you used to open it up. And if you put it was all full of line and stuff. If you put your hand in and got hold of anything, any one item, and lifted it in the air, everything in the ice cream tub used to come out. It was like a Christmas tree of tangled line, bits of hook, you know, bits of line with a bead on, a few, just everything, all in one great big knot. And I'd snip off the bit I needed, reuse a hook. I never had any tackle in those days at all. I was forever borrowing a bead or borrowing a swivel, you know, because I didn't have what I needed. It's just the way I fished. Not an awful lot different now, to be honest. But yeah, so I used to trot around with this squeaky wheeled little trolley all around the lake. It used to drive CP mad, because CP was always keeping an eye on me because I was catching a few fish. And I remember someone telling me they were fishing next to CP, or walking past his bivvy, I think it was, and I was on the move on the far bank. And they said all they heard from CP swim was, "What is that little beep up to now?" She's like, "Where's he going?" And every time I'd trot up and down, CP would be out there in case he was missing a trick. But yeah, I had a few more fish doing that. But one day I was making my way round, and I was right up the top end. I'd gone round the Dog Bay. I'd gone out on Springgates Point, and I remember Tetley, who I haven't introduced yet. Tetley had joined that year. Again, still a good mate, Tet. He was fishing in the Church Bay, and I've gone along there, and he's got a couple of beers there, and I sat down in the shade under this tree with him, and we cracked a beer and that, and said, "How's it going? Anything happening?" And he said there were loads of fish here, big fish, all cruising in and out. He said, "I haven't seen anything today. I think they've gone." I said, "You've been up the tree?" He said, No, I haven't. I don't do that." I said, "I'll have a look." So I shinned up this tree and looked out, and I thought, "Oh my God," you know. I made a bit of a mistake, really. It was a bit unlike me. I've shouted down. There's like, well, sort of shouted, whispered down. "There's loads out there, Ted. You know, there's shoulders, there's this, there's the other." And he was like, "Oh, right, okay, I'm staying put." And afterwards I thought, I shouldn't have said anything, should I, really? I should have just come down and said, "Don't know, can't really see, mate." And he probably would have moved off. But he didn't. He stayed in there. So I suppose I could say I'd done the right thing. But But I'm looking, thinking, well, I want to be in this area. Now, Springgates Point was about 40 yards to the right, but it was fishing completely the wrong area. And between Springgates Point and this Church Bay swim, which was Church Bay Steps, it was called, was a huge, great weed bed. And it had been there for weeks on the surface, so this complete raft of weed. And as I'm walking up and down the bank thinking, how can I get close to this bonanza of carp, I've looked out and I thought, hang on, something's changed. And this big weed bed, which was in between the two swims, had a massive hole in the middle. On the surface, there was a bit missing. You know, probably, I don't know, a rod length round of the top of the weed wasn't there anymore. And I thought, that looks proper interesting. I wonder what it's like down there. So I've got my rod and my little tri-lobe lead, and I flicked it out in the hole, trapped it just as it's hit the weed at the back, and pulled it forward a little bit, let it go down, and it's gone down and down and down. It's quite deep. Down and down and down and down without pinging off anything on the way. And it's on the bottom, not hard, but on the bottom. And I pulled it and it's just slid. Nothing. And then gone donk into the close side of the weed, like a polo, you know. Give it another couple and thought that they've stripped it. You know, they've been in there and they've stripped a circle there just about big enough to get 2 rods in. You couldn't really fish it from Springgates, it was right round to the left. But in between was, I sort of pushed the foliage in that apart, was another jetty. It was another swim that had yet to be fished. So I sort of pushed all the bushes. There was plenty of room there to bivvy up. Pushed all the bushes and that out of the way. And sure enough, there's this lovely little jetty, an old trout fishing platform. So I've managed to get my rods in there. I think I might have had a rod pod with me or something. I don't know. I'll have a look in the photo anyway. But I managed to get 2 rods in there, poking through the bushes, flipped them out there into this hole, fired a fair bit of bait in there, because I knew the fish were down in the Church Bay at this time. But I thought that, you know, they've been feeding there. They've stripped it out, something rotten in there. I got my rods out there, sat up on the high bank behind with Ted, because now we're very close to each other. And we've sat up there, we've had a few beers and had a few more beers and had a bit of smoke and a laugh and what have you, typical chilling out with a mate. And I remember, as we sat there that evening, sometimes I heard something. Sometimes you hear the fish before you hear them come out. You know, you hear that sort of, and I heard the noise of this fish starting to come out, and I spun my head round, and there, right in the middle of my swim, of my circle of clear within the weed, this mirror came out, and it was completely side on to us, so we got the whole profile, and it was a big dish-shaped mirror carp, big fish, and it just come like that, wiggled its way right up, so we could see the whole profile of it, and then just slid straight back down like that, off, you know, barely a ripple. And it's thought, oh my God, proper good one, bang, smack on top of my area. I'm getting a bite any second now. As it happens, it wasn't any second now. It wasn't until I had nothing through the night. I heard a couple more in the night, and it was the next morning when eventually one of them got picked up. How it lasted that long, I don't know. There was fizzing at first light out there. It was rocking. It was definitely going to happen. I think what was happening was the fish were going into my circle, having a little grub up, coming out, going down into this swim, sort of in and out of the bay. And it was just when they were going to pick up the right one, you know, one of the hook baits. Anyway, it was sort of early-ish morning. Bang, one's gone, and I'm on it straight away. And it, you know, I was envisaging in my head that it was going to be a problem. My lines went over the weed and down into this hole, and I remember I'd even got some lead putty from somewhere, probably borrowed it off Tet, and I'd put it like 6-10 foot or whatever back from the rig, so that I could cast over the weed and then let line out, so that instead of my line going down at a hideous angle to the bottom, it would all fall to the bottom and lay sort of flat. But I was envisaging that it's going to be a problem because they're in a hole in the weed, but it wasn't. Hooked this fish, pulled him towards. There was a small gap that where I'd cast a few times. I'd broken the weed a little bit, and that's what my lines were going through. and I managed to lead him straight through it, you know, like a sheepdog rounding up sheep and putting them in the pen. You know, he went round and round the pen, and then he came through this gap, and I thought, this is plain sailing. I had no idea what sort of size the fish was. Tetley went down to this little tiny jetty and made enough room, got the net, and I'm sort of half out there with him over his shoulder. Got this fish in close, and then we could see it, and it was probably that fish that came out. It was that sort of stamp and shape of fish. It's got right in front of the net, and it's just put its head down, and it's gone down like that in the weed, and it's buried its face in the weed. We could see its tail just coming like this, just waving and waving above the weed. I couldn't lift it out. It's not like the line was snagged on it. It was just using its upper body weight and the beat of its tail just to stay there right in front of us. I'm right over the top of it, and pulling. And eventually, sort of in between tail beats, I've managed to lift its head out a little bit, and then it's come up. Still tail first. It's just come up with its head down and its tail still going, and this big old dish-shaped body swaying about, and Tet's just scooped it up, and it's in the net. And I'm like, yes, proper result. We dragged it out, got it on the bank, and we knew straight away because of its tail. It's got this perfect heart tail, and the fish is called Heartail. It's the one that Sticky Bean had in the video on the last episode. And I've got him, and he looked glorious. I mean, the colour on it and that, it just looked absolutely beautiful, this fish, as you'll see in the pictures. And I think it was at quite a good weight. I believe he says looking down and look at his notes and trying not to get caught doing it, but it doesn't say down there how big it is. In my mind, I seem to remember it being 1 ounce over 35 pounds, which is a big old carp. And again, an 18 member, and such a good looking fish. And from then on, that swim became known. It got opened up a bit more, and it became known as the Heartail swim. And it's still known, I believe, today as the Heartail swim. It's a proper swim now. But back then, as you saw from the picture, it was just a little gap in the bushes and a hole in the weed. But it certainly did me a favour that day. Heartail, 35 pounds. Result.
Mr. Lane bagged another beauty.
Somewhere over the back of the pole.
Glorious Heartail.
Oh, it's only 29 now.
35-1.
Yeah. 35-1, that's 1 ounce divisions. 35-1 Dave.
Result!
Crack on.
Well, at least without the original track over it, which I'm not allowed to play because it's got music on, you don't have to listen to the planes. I mean, you're going to notice, you know, in anything that I do manage to have the original soundtrack, that is the soundtrack to Horton and Raysbury and all that area. Are the planes. They're just constant one after another. But look at that carp. What absolute beauty. Amazing looking fish that was. The colours on it. Yeah, I appreciate the colours might be a bit distorted over time on this clip, but it was just incredible on the bank. Beautiful, beautiful fish. More colourful than Jenkins. And that's saying something. I was well chuffed with him. He's actually on the cover. That's the fish that's on the cover of An Obsession with Carp. What a carp. And the next little bit coming up, I love that. I can see it coming up on the time. Oh, there she is. Fat Sam in all her glory. Relaxing amongst the odd empty beer can. God, I love the 90s.
That was actually my 10th fish of the season. Bear in mind, I only had 7 the whole year before. And the guy who had the most fish, I had the second most the first year, was Weedbed Willie. And he had 9 fish. So already I've had 10 fish, and we're still in the summer. The bait was working. Like I said, Phil was catching doubles, hand over fist. Keith had a few. In fact, I think it was possibly the week after or within a couple of weeks of me having Heartail, I was up there in that general vicinity. Keith was fishing spring gates. I think I might have been in the Church Bay Steps actually. And I've heard a holler go up that Keith's into another fish. And I've gone along there. I think it's a windy, horrible old day, if I remember correctly. And I've gone there, and he's into this carp, and he's playing it in a typical Keith fashion, you know, come out of the sea, and he's doing it all this, and he's playing this fish, and he's trying to charge about, and he's trying to not give it an inch of line. And I remember Jacko was there, me, Fat Sam, Keith, all crowded on this little jetty at the front, all trying to get a look. I don't know why we did that. We always used to do that. If someone hooked a fish, it was, like I say, very sociable. Like, everyone wanted to be in on it, but everyone was generally so compact in the front of the swims. It was actually really quite hard to even move a rod about without clonking someone. But he's managed anyway, and the line held firm. Sorry, Keith. And he's landed this common, lovely, long common, beautiful fish. And it was a new PB common for him. I've got video, I'll show you the video in a sec. Just want to tell you that that fish became known as the PB common because it wasn't that it was vastly bigger than the others or anything. It wasn't. It just, everybody that caught it, I think there was about 4 or 5 captures on the trot over a couple of years, and it just happened to be everybody's personal best common. So it became known as the PB common, and it always remained the PB common. But like I say, I've got a nice bit of video of that, so we'll ping over there, back to the 90s, have a look at that now.
So there he is, giving it the old Jenkins come out of the sea, heave-ho. Did like to give him some, well, there's Del Boy. And Fat Sam coming in to have a look. I say everyone crowding, many people as you can get on a jetty, that was always the way. Make it as awkward as possible for the bloke playing the fish. I do remember this day, it was, wind was howling in there, absolutely. It was a right miserable old day, but Keith was happy, proper happy. Unfortunately you can't hear the screaming and shouting, but what he's just done is beaten his personal best common. Look, there's my old Avons, he's nicked me scales. Probably never gave them back after the other incident. There he is. In bright yellow, bright green. Look at that hat. Oh dear, you gotta love it, haven't you?
So there he is with his new PB common, looking very pleased, as you can well appreciate, I'm sure. So what we're going to do, is, I'm not sure how long I've been rabbiting on for today, but I know it is definitely moonshine time. And time for a final little story just to put on the end of this before I go downstairs and try and chop up all the bits of video and get them all in the right place and lay the photos over and what have you. I do know that quite a few people use these more like a podcast, whereas you just listen to them. So if you are only listening to them, fair enough. But you are missing out on a few photos and some very good old video. But let's have a little sip of this. Purely medicinal purposes, so mouth gets dry when you talk too much. So. And I did see on the government COVID guidelines to say stay hydrated, so I'm just doing as I'm told. So anyway, before we finish, little story to finish on. Tornadoes, whirlwinds, whatever you want, water spouts, whatever you want to call them. I was round in CP and Robbie's area. Can't remember whose bivvy it was we were in. And as I sort of mentioned before, they drink a lot of tea, and back in those days we all had the odd spicy carp fags. So I'd been sat around up there with them, drinking tea, having a little smoke, middle of the afternoon, and eventually I thought, I better trot off back to my swim, cast my rods out. I remember whatever bivvy we were in, it was in the ski slope, and I was fishing around in the Church Bay. So I trotted off back to my swim, probably feeling a little bit worse for wear. Sat down on my chair at the front of the swim. I don't think I'd even put the rods out at this stage. Planes were going over non-stop. It was blowing a easterly wind, I think, which is quite significant. I'll tell you why in a sec. And suddenly, out there in the lake, I saw a little swirl, and it got bigger, and it got bigger, and it got bigger, and it turned into a whirlwind. And it was about, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 foot high, and it was pulling the surface of the water up in this perfect, like you see on the telly, you know, twister. And it started twisting, and it started coming towards me, and it's coming across the lake, and you hear it. You can hear it going shh, and it came right in and crashed into the reeds next to me, and all the reeds moved, and then it just dissipated. And I was like, oh my God, you know, I've never seen anything like it before in my life. So I've jumped up and I've run straight back round to CP swim or Robbie swim. Gone straight in the bivvy. They're still there chatting and laughing, smoking and drinking tea. I go, you won't believe it, you won't believe it. I've just seen this whirlwind, this whirlpool. I said, pulled all the water up in a big spout and came across the lake and smashed into the reeds. And as I'm telling the story, I've looked at the looks on their faces, and they've sort of looked at what they're smoking and looked at me and gone, really? I'm like, all right. I just wandered back. They must have thought I was mental. But luckily, I think it was the next week, CP saw one as well. And the relevance to the easterly wind, the planes, they change direction on the wind. They always take off into the wind. And what would happen in an easterly wind, you'd get a downdraft sometimes off of the bigger, lower planes. And that is a swirl, like a big double swirl of air. And that would come down, and that could concentrate and create these whirlwind things, water spouters. Sometimes you'd see them right up in the trees. You'd see all the trees bending in the wind, and then you'd see a section of them in the middle stand up straight, go back the other way for a second, and then go back to what they were doing as one of these high-level whirlwinds went through. But we did see a few on the lake, and luckily other people see them. And I remember I mentioned last time about Katie, the old deer who used to feed the geese and the swans, and have you seen my plums? I remember bumping into her, or she walked past me on the causeway one day, and a huge one of these had just gone over, and it had come across the potato field, and they'd just harvested it. So there was straw and chaff and whatever, the tops, bits of stuff all over this field. And it had lifted it all up. I hadn't realised. I was stood there chatting to Katie, and it started coming down, like just out of the sky. It started raining straw and stuff everywhere, all settling all over the lake. And I said to Katie, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And she said, "See what?" I didn't have the best sight or hearing. I said, "It's raining straw." And she just sort of looked at me and shook her head and smiled, just like CP and Robbie had done the first time I mentioned it. And off she walked. And I thought, I'm not even going to mention these whirlwinds anymore. No one else seems to be able to see them apart from me. But they are a thing. They're still a thing. I still fish in that rough area. And I still see the odd one even today. But anyway, so there we go. That brings us neatly to the end of today's filming. Let's have another little medicinal. And I'll take all this down and edit it. Like I said, if you scroll down to when I finish rabbiting, there's now a little link for the books. Save you, anyone that wants one, scribbling down the address, you click it, takes you straight to the website, and there's 2 tabs there, buy this one, buy that one. I do have to say that the post at the moment is all over the place. A lot of people are getting them in 3 days, some people 4 days, some people 5 days. Apparently the post office is worse than Christmas, so you'll just have to bear with them. They're doing their best, I'm sure. And I think for today, that's about it. So, cheers. Stay safe. Until next time. Ta-da.